The Roots of Jihad by our guest, Dr. Tawfiq Hamid. And now let me introduce him. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
I should also give out the website, rootsofjihad.com.
Yeah.
Most people watching will not know you. Broad opening question. Tell us your story, please.
Yeah. My name is Tawfiq Hamid. I was born in Egypt, Cairo, in 1961 for a secular family. My father actually was an atheist and my mother was not religious at all. Around the age of 16, I started to think about the concept of creator and God, and this was through my study for the DNA molecule in biology. So I started to think about the creation and these things, and when I joined the medical school later on, I became really religiously motivated to serve God. This was like a purpose that at that time for me. And I was attracted to the Jama'ah Islamiyya, which was a terrorist Islamic organization as classified now, but it was legal back then in the medical school. In this Jama'ah Islamiyya, I started to learn more about the details of the Islamic teaching, which was called Salafi Islam. That's a sort of Islam that they promote. And I met there with Dr. Ayman al-Zawahri, who became second in command of Al-Qaeda later on. He was older than me, but he was my mentor, like teacher for all of us. He teaches us about Islam and such
This
things.
is the person we know of who's...
Yeah, of course, who became second commander. And honestly, within few months period of following this sort of teaching, I changed it totally from an innocent person to someone who is ready to kill. To die for Allah, to kill others, to do crimes. I started to think in taking the theoretical violent teaching into practice. And then just I felt I can't continue in this anymore. And I started...
How long were you with this group?
Just 8 months, but they were more than enough.
In Cairo? Or
yes, in Cairo. In the medical school. They started by a small room in the medical school. The school allowed them to pray there, and it grew into a mosque, and it later on there was a library, and then they started to even intervene with our freedom inside the medical school itself.
And how many people, how many members?
You can say around at least 5% of the medical school were there, so around totally probably 1,000 members overall.
1,000 people?
Or, yeah, around this number.
Being trained by the man who became the number 2 in Al-Qaeda?
Yeah, yeah.
But why, though, would people... You would assume that those with the medical knowledge and the medical aspiration would question fundamentalism and not be natural candidates for violent religious revolution?
That's a very good question, and the answer is simply that our way of education is generally does not encourage critical thinking. It's sort of rote learning. So this is one factor that made us unable to probably to critique what we learned. So this was a factor that you can say, if you are a doctor or engineer or whatever, but it's okay, but if you don't have critical thinking, you could be brainwashed. And also being in the medical school, we used to see what we consider the beauty of the Creator, the power of God in the medical things, in the genetics, in biochemistry, and also the dissection room itself. We see the dead bodies. So these Islamic fundamentalists used to tell us this is how you will be one day, and the day of judgment is coming, and you will be tortured when you die. And they use this sort of fear, they created fear into our hearts, and they used it as energy to direct us toward this sort of violent teaching.
I assume, though, that most of the people there, by the nature of being medical students, were middle class in background. These are not people from impoverished areas.
Absolutely not.
So this wasn't out of poverty or desperation?
Absolutely not. And it's actually catastrophic to assume other causes for this problem other than the teaching itself. The Salafi teaching itself, because if it was poverty or lack of education or such things, it would have affected all people in the society, either Muslims or Christians, to the same degree. So we would have expected to see some suicide bombers in Egypt or in other countries who are Christians, but this never happened. It's always Muslim. So obviously it's not the circumstances, If it is circumstances, it should affect Muslims and the Christians as well. But when it is only in certain sect, you should think deeply that there is something wrong with this sort of teaching. This doesn't mean Islam couldn't be understood peacefully, but the current dominant version and teaching in the mosque, in Al-Azhar University, in areas like Saudi Arabia, certainly promote a lot of violent things. For example, it's now, till now, it is basics to this traditional Salafi Islamic teaching, the following: killing the apostates, beating women, calling Jews pigs and monkeys, till now in our mosques, and it is in the teaching till now, declaring wars on non-Muslims to force them on being Muslims, or to force them on paying money called jizya, humiliating tax, or to kill them, and enslaving female war prisoners and raping them, as what is happening now in Darfur. So this sort of teaching is till now fundamental. Till now in Saudi Arabia, the rule is to kill the apostate. In Iran, they kill gays. So if you think there is certainly some element of violence within this teaching, and if this does not change, it will bring a catastrophe for all our world.
Dr. Tawfiq Hamid, who is an Egyptian, trained as a doctor and was recruited into an Islamic terrorist group. You were with them for 8 months. You accepted. You consumed what they were offering. You were prepared. You were prepared to kill and die.
Certainly,
Really?
certainly.
Did you do anything that was illegal or violent?
No, this was the moment when I started to question, when I started to think actively in doing something. I was actually invited to go to Afghanistan at that time, and I was mentally prepared to do this. In this moment, actually, I started to feel that I have to think differently, and I met with some guy who invited me for another sect of Islam that was relatively peaceful, and just a totally new story starts or began when I shifted from them to another sect of Islam, and I started to develop a new form of understanding Islam, or you can call it reformation within Islam, as what happened in Christianity and Judaism and other religions throughout history. This is what we need in Islam at the moment.
Well, let's first of all talk about the claims you made before the break, and they were striking, and some would argue they were sweeping. That this form of Islam allows or encourages killing of those who convert, killing of infidels, of homosexuals, enslaving of women, raping of women, certainly in Darfur at the moment. And this is a Muslim on Muslim war. It's an ethnic war, but Arab Muslims who are attacking African Muslims. This is not, Christians are not involved in this part of the area. Genocide, horrible crimes being committed. Many would argue this is in the name of ethnic superiority and imperialism. You say no, it's motivated by a form of Islam?
Why Christians who live in south part of Sudan are not doing this at the moment? Why it is only Muslims? This is the question. There are Christians who live in the area, and they don't participate in these acts. So there is element. There could be other cofactors, but trying to deny the concept that this sort of teaching or Salafi Islamic teaching promotes violence is just not true or not correct.
How influential is it? Because we all know, I mean, there's a lot of banal suburban analysis of Islam from people who are too frightened to really get to the heart of the issue here. But anecdotally, we all know people who are Muslim, who are gracious, decent people. How influential is this form of Islamic teaching?
You mean that the violent teaching is, just to give you a concrete example, if you went to most of, if not all Islamic universities, and you open the books of explanation of the Quran and the Hadith, okay, you will certainly see that the teaching in nearly all of them is violent and promotes these violent things. Like beating women, for example, is accepted, and till now Islamic scholars did not deny it clearly or didn't say it's not allowed. The maximum thing they say, it's of the face. You are not allowed to beat her on the face. But the concept of beating women is still there, okay? The concept of killing apostates, all Islamic scholars promote it. So we are talking about a phenomenon that's widespread, and it is a dominant form of teaching. I can say it is the majority. Majority certainly believe in this.
But Take Iran, for example. Now, there is a ceiling for women. There are positions they cannot achieve, but there are many, many women at university in Iran. There are women in positions of influence. There are some women, obviously, who suffer, but they could make the argument there's huge amounts of pornography and abuse in Western societies.
There is a difference here. When pornography probably abuse, beating women, for example, happen in a Western society, it doesn't happen based on religious teaching. So someone who is drunk beating his wife, he can next day say, I did a mistake, okay? But when you justify this to someone telling him that God himself allows you to beat your wife, then you can change this person from an innocent person to someone who start beating his wife based on this justification from God himself. So there is huge difference here. If someone did a crime, his conscience may tell him that this is wrong one day and he might change. But if someone feels that God is justifying this crime to him, then it's very difficult to change. And that is probably the real core of the problem here.
I just want to reiterate this point, or to challenge you on this point. You're saying the majority of Islamic universities, and obviously Islamic universities are in the Islamic world, the majority of them would teach the more militant and potentially violent aspect of Islam and interpretation of Islam.
Certainly.
So there are no universities, no Islamic universities in the Muslim world who are teaching a more moderate, gentle interpretation of the Quran?
No, let me make things clear now here for you. We have Salafi Islam, that is the sort of Islam that is very violent, okay? That was actually mainly in the Arab Peninsula, okay? And we have Sufi Islam, that is sort of mystical form of Islam that's very peaceful. And we have liberals or secular Muslims, okay? If some young Muslim asked a question about killing apostates or beating women or calling Jews pigs and monkeys or such things to a Salafi Muslim, okay, he will bring to him hundreds of references to support these violent things from the Islamic literature, and you can check yourself. It's not a problem. It's available now, and you can check. So they can bring him hundreds of references supporting their views. The Sufi Muslims or Sufi are very innocent people, peaceful people, but they don't have a theological base for their peaceful way of thinking. They can tell to the young Muslim, my son, just be good to others, and God wants you to be good. And if the young Muslim insisted and asked, but this is written in the books, they can tell him, wait, and God will explain this to you clearly in the day of judgment, based on a verse that says, يَوْمَ يَأْتِ تَأْوِيلُ, which means when the day of judgment comes, the understanding of the Quran will be there. No, not now. So they have certain form of understanding that is peaceful, but they don't have powerful theological base for it. The secular Muslim do not know the verses probably, basically. So if you are young Muslims, the only one of them who have a strong theological base is the Salafi, which dominated our area when Saudi Arabia became rich in the last 30 years. We in Egypt and other countries start to look to this form of teaching that dominated their area. We were moderate, relatively moderate, 40 or 50 years ago, relatively. And we started to say Allah or God blessed the Saudi by petrol because they adopt this sort of Salafi teaching, which is crystal clear on the sword of the flag and the words, no God except Allah and Muhammad is a prophet of Allah. Is the link between the religion and the violence is clear here as a symbol. But we started to adopt this form of teaching in Egypt, in other countries, so it replaced our moderate understanding of Islam. So this what happened. The next step that was really crucial, when the Islamic organizations took the concept of jihad from a nation level or ummah level, which is that the Islamic nation should declare war on non-Muslims to spread Islam and such things, they took this level from the nation level to individual level, based on a verse that says قاتل في سبيل الله لا تكلف إلا نفسك, which means fight for the cause of Allah, you are only responsible for yourself. So based on their interpretation, they took the concept of declaring wars on other to even a smaller level instead of nation level. So they start to form small cells attacking others, and it went like this.
And the future, I suppose, of a peaceful world. My guest, Dr. Tawfiq Hamid, who, let's promote his book once more if we may, The Roots of Jihad. which is readily available on his website, rootsofjihad.com. Speaking of jihad, and you mentioned this before the commercial break, I know Muslims who will say, yes, there is a concept of war, of military struggle, but also internal jihad, struggling against demons, against temptation, against the tendency to sin, so purification of the self, completely peaceful, as a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu would, the idea of purifying the inner person. Can jihad not mean that?
Look, jihad has two meanings, the word jihad. In pure Arabic language literature, it is a defensive term. Basically, the word is derived from the verb jahada or yujahad, which means to resist something. But if you start attacking others, it's called udwan, not jihad. You attack others. This is prevented in the Quran. But the practical application throughout history and the religious understanding of jihad is to convey, is to a great extent convey war on others, especially in Salafi teaching, to force them on Islam or pay you jizya or to kill them. So both are true. In Arabic language it is a defensive term, but in the religious application throughout history the application was very offensive. Through this application of jihad, the early Arabs invaded Europe, invaded north of Africa, invaded Palestine and parts of Asia. So there are two meanings of jihad. Sufi people understand jihad as internal conflict. And this could be okay, but the dominant one of the Salafi teaching is really violent one. So we are talking about the reality now, not the theory. It's like the word gay in English means happy, but the practical application now means something else. So it's exactly like this. The original word jihad is defensive, but the practical application, they took this and attacked others in history. So it has two meanings.
For those who would argue that a region is exploited by superpowers, Soviets play games, Americans play games, France, Germany, Britain, are people who are often ruled by dictators, sometimes propped up by the West, various conflicts, some people with incredible wealth, others living in poverty, so that there are groups of individuals who are looking for some sort of unifying, liberating ideology. It hasn't been communism, obviously. It's not capitalism. They see it in Islam. So, okay, maybe they are being told things that aren't completely true, or they're being given a very violent interpretation of the Quran, but it's a liberating force. You can understand why people are embracing jihadism.
I'm sorry, can you just summarize the question?
Well, that people can understand, that we should understand why some people in the Middle East in particular, and elsewhere in the Muslim world, are becoming radical Muslims. Because for them it's a way of liberation.
No. Based on my personal experience and the people around me, I don't believe this is true at all. And you can just have a look on a 7/7 attack in London. The homegrown terrorism happened in a very democratic society. The people were well educated. They don't need liberty. So its lack of democracy was not a cause. Okay, and it actually they generate a sort of they make you feel not interested in the earthly living at all, and they make you live in your nirvana, in the paradise and their fleshly enjoyments there. And in fact, one of the contributing factors to this phenomena is what I call sexual deprivation syndrome, which is simply as that in the Middle East, in the 70s until now, it was become very difficult to marry because of the costs. For marriage was very high. It's costly to marry in this part of the world because the man has to pay a lot of money to marry, and also extra
the cost of the wedding, the ceremony.
And the whole cost to start a new life as marriage is very costly in the Middle East, and extramarital relations are prohibited in Islam,
which is a good thing.
Of course, certainly it's a good thing, but I'm explaining. I'm trying just to analyze what happened. Many scholars also prevent Muslims, our young Muslims, they told them masturbation is even not allowed. Okay,
this is Christian teaching too.
No, this is at one side, but you don't probably teach the other part. The other part is this is at one hand. On the other hand, they are telling you the women are waiting for you in the tents up there in the paradise, describing them to you in a very sexual manner. When you read the current traditional Islamic books, you will see this clearly. So at one hand, you have this suppression, which is okay by itself. It's not a problem. People can tolerate this. But on the other hand, the more religious you become, the more you dream about these things. And it becomes like a sort of extraordinary power that directs many young Muslims to dream about going to paradise just to make sex. I will give you a concrete example about this. Do you know Shia Muslims? Mm-hmm. There are Shia and Sunni. Shia Muslims, Shia allows something called mut'a marriage, which is a temporary marriage for enjoyment. That's the meaning of mut'a marriage. It can last from 1 hour to 99 years. So people can just marry for 1 hour and that's it. So they have some element of sexual release. You might have noticed that the percentage of suicide bombers are basically from Sunni, who have extreme sexual suppression. But Shia Muslims do not do much suicide bombings, partially because, not only, but partially because they are able to release their sexual desires on earth without going to paradise to enjoy this. This was a contributing factor. And also poverty. Some people can say poverty is a contributing factor. There is a relationship between terrorism and poverty, but it's not as many people imagine. When terrorism happened in Egypt, because of the proliferation of Islamism phenomena, terrorism started to happen. We killed tourists in Egypt. Tourism went down. The economy went down. Poverty increased. When poverty increased, it became easier for terrorist organizations to recruit new members. So, and when they recruit new members, they do more terrorism, so more poverty, and it goes like a vicious cycle of positive feedback mechanism. But the primary factor in this cycle is not poverty. It is terror, Islamism and terrorism itself. Because if it was poverty, why then most of the hijackers of September 11th were from the richest Islamic country? And majority of terrorists and suicide bombers till now are not from poor families. So they weren't poor, they weren't of low education. So statistically speaking, it's clear that majority of terrorists were not poor and were not poorly educated. So if someone wants to assume something else, this is just imaginary assumption, not based on facts.
I want to question you on a couple of things you said. When we come back, my guest, Dr. Tawfiq Hamid, whose book, The Roots of Jihad, is available, I'm sure, on the internet and elsewhere. I have to challenge you on something you said, because I have a feeling it hasn't been heard before on Canadian television, and there'll be many people who are deeply offended by it, although being offended is not the worst thing in the world. The truth is more important than simply the fear of causing offense. You say that sexual frustration leads some people to commit acts of terrorism.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that in Muslim teaching, and I support this teaching, a sexual relationship is only within marriage.
Which is good.
And it's critical of masturbation, critical of extramarital affairs, all of that I can understand. But you're saying that men who cannot have a sexual relationship become so frustrated, the idea of virgins awaiting them in paradise is enough for them to kill themselves and kill other people?
Yes, I was personally ready to do this just for this reason, honestly.
And with all due respect, that isn't just you?
Not just me. Many around me, many friends around me in the Jama'ah Islamiyah. But I'm talking here about the mentality of the jihadists. Not probably ordinary Muslims in the street, it's the jihadists who are. And if you see the letters that were given to the suicide bombers, most of them are talking about women in paradise. So I'm not just saying something out of vacuum. If you see the letters themselves, it's clearly about women waiting for them in the paradise. And this was a very powerful motivating factor, and can partially, as I mentioned, explain why Sunni Muslims are more liable to do suicide bombings than Shia Muslims, because Shia has some element of sexual release through mut'a marriage, which is temporary marriage for enjoyment, as I explained to you. It's approved in the religion.
But Shia Islam, Hezbollah is a Shia organization. I mean, maybe not suicide bombings, but
not suicide bombings. That's different. I'm talking about suicide bombings. The concept of to die to enter the paradise. That is different from doing terrorism. You can attack someone remotely, but to go yourself and die, partially is related to this issue of sexual deprivation syndrome. Certainly. There are many evidence. There are letters that are given to the terrorists, to the suicide bombers before doing the attacks. The percentage of suicide bombers in Shia is much less than Sunni, who they have some element of sexual release through mut'a marriage. And this is concrete evidence, plus my personal experience that I shared it with many others as well, which I personally was ready to do this just to make sex in paradise. This was my dream back then. I have to be honest with you. It's embarrassing, but I'm just
don't be embarrassed. I say, the truth must always be discussed, even if it does make some people uncomfortable. You said that for the longest time, Egypt, for example, was a moderate country in terms of Islam. If it was moderate before the influence of Saudi Arabia and extremism, could it be moderate again?
Yes, but it's a bit difficult. It's not impossible, but it's not, reversibility is possible. But you have to use very accurately measured strategical steps and tactical steps to achieve this. It's not a simple reversal process. It's the biochemical reaction happen, and there is new products now, and people are brainwashed, and it's not an issue of just information, it's an issue of perception. So you can provide the information, but the process of brainwashing that happened to this generation in the last few decades have changed the perception itself. So it can happen, certainly, but it has to be well adjusted and organized to do it successfully.
How would we do that?
How would you do this? Number one, if you analyze the whole problem, you can see that there is an element of violent sort of teaching, the Salafi teaching, okay? It creates what I call a generation that have some tendency to accept certain violent things, like killing apostate, declaring jihad on others. They accept it. They don't do it, but they accept it. And that's why they don't demonstrate against the terrorists. They don't issue fatwa against bin Laden. Till now, there is no single fatwa, as you see, against bin Laden. So this group of people is significant majority. I call them passive terrorists. They don't do attacks. They don't do anything, but they support it. And this is clear by their passive attitude toward bin Laden, and they don't do demonstrations against him. The third level is the active terrorists, who conduct the attacks themselves. They are a very small percentage of Muslims who will reach that level. But there is always tendency that the passive terrorists can change into jihadists. The passive terrorists, or the majority, are interested in applying Sharia law again, which means you will be deprived of all your freedom at the end. If Sharia law simply means killing apostate, beating women is allowed, calling Jews pigs and monkeys is okay, declaring wars to spread Islam is fine, enslaving female war prisoners and raping them is okay. This is part of Sharia.
We had a debate on Sharia law in this province, and it didn't occur, but there were many advocates of Sharia law who would completely object to what you said.
They object what? They can open any Sharia book, and this is standard teaching. What they object about? This is standards of their teaching. If it's not a standard in the teaching, let them openly in the mosque and in the Islamic organization denounce these things, and I will be the first person to salute them. Let them denounce these things. Let them stand next Friday in the mosques here in Canada and say killing the apostates is wrong, beating women is wrong, calling Jews pigs and monkeys is a sin and wrong.
There are Muslim leaders who say that. There are Muslim leaders who do speak out and say
if they said this clearly, openly, in an unambiguous manner in the mosque, I will be the first person to salute them.
Dr. Tawfiq Hamid, who is an Egyptian by birth, a medical student, and was, I suppose, recruited, seduced into an Islamic terrorist group. For 8 months he was there. He was with the person who became number 2 in Al-Qaeda, number 2 to Osama bin Laden, and then rejected that. His book, The Roots of Jihad, is available, and his website is rootsofjihad.com. I should just say, because people will be curious, you're saying things, you're writing things that would make you an extremely unpopular man in many areas. Can you go back to Egypt? Are you allowed to? Are you safe?
Look, the government is secular, so theoretically speaking, there is no problem from at the government level. But at people level, certainly some people will not be happy with any sort of reforming within Islam, which is my ultimate dream, is to provide a new peaceful understanding of the religion, which can happen, but there are many forces against this, and these people can certainly attack someone like me.
Are you generally say, I mean, I cannot, for example, tell people where you live, and there are security considerations that were involved today, but are you generally safe?
I don't want, believe me, to think about these issues. I think about one thing, that is, at some moments or time in history, some people have to stand and speak out and tell the truth, and I'm just honored to be one of them. Just as simple as that.
More than 1 billion Muslims, people converting to Islam. We have to believe, well, it's absolutely true that a number of the people I've traveled in the Middle East are reasonable, gracious people.
Yeah, sure.
They want coexistence, they want justice. They have some valid grievances too. They're not always treated properly. You mentioned how we can deal with fundamentalism. But what about those Muslims who will say, look at the Egyptian government. There are brutal police officers in Egypt. It's a police state in many ways. I mean, there's torture. And America backs it, America props it up. You can't expect ordinary Egyptians to say, that's good, we'll just... They're looking for some form of escape, surely.
When you analyze this issue, we should clearly understand that there could be 2 problems or 3 problems, but this doesn't mean that if one problem exists, the other does not exist. Okay? So the whole issue, yes, there could be some problems, other problems, but this does not mean there is no problem with these violent parts of the current or Salafi Islamic teaching. There are. So it's like AIDS virus is bad, can damage people, and cancer also can kill people. So the existence of cancer does not mean that AIDS does not exist. So there could be 2 problems or 3 problems, but you have to address all of them, not one of them, and try to figure everything around this problem and forget about all the others.
The argument that it's all about the Israeli-Arab, the Israel-Palestine issue. It's all about a Jewish state in the middle of the Muslim world, and if it wasn't for Israel, everything would be fine, and it's all about occupation. Is there any truth to this?
This is absolutely not true, and I will give you my view clearly here. Number one, the Arab-Israeli conflict started in 1948, basically when the State of Israel was declared. The jihadist phenomena started to happen in the late 70s, and it's increasing till now. There was 30 years gap here. The jihadism phenomena that starts in the late 80s is not related in time to the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's directly related in time to the increased wealth of Saudi Arabia, which we call it petro-Islam, that helped the proliferation of Wahhabism and Salafism and this fundamentalist way of thinking. So if you put it on a curve, you can clearly see that the start of jihadism phenomena in the late 70s is directly related to increased wealth of Saudi Arabia rather than the Arab-Israeli conflict at all. In fact, now we have peace agreements with Israel. So we expect jihadism should go down again, if it is because of Israel. But in the 30 years after Israel was declared, there was wars. Yet jihadism phenomena was not prominent like this. This is number one. Number two, if the cause of all the problems was because of the Arab-Israeli conflict, or what some call the Palestinian oppression by Israel, why the Palestinian Christians are not doing suicide bombings again? If the issue again was oppression, we would expect some percentage of Christians to participate in the process of suicide bombing, not all Muslims. So certainly it's not the circumstances, it is other factor here. Number three, if you went to Algeria, you will realize that the Salafi Islamic groups killed more than 100,000 and 150,000 innocent people, including young kids. They used to slaughter them. So is there anyone on this globe who can convince me or can convince any sane person that killing more than 150,000 innocent in Algeria by the hand of Algerian Muslims, is it also because of the Arab-Israeli conflict? Can you just believe this could be related? And if in addition to this, if you went to the borders between Israel and Palestinians, a few years ago, you will certainly see thousands of Palestinians who are very interested to go and work in Israel. So if Israel was a bad country, Why thousands are interested to go and work there? Why we don't see the opposite? Why we don't see the Arab Israeli, more than 1 million who live there, are standing in queues to escape from Israel as the Jews escaped from Germany to go to their Arab counterparts?
But come on.
You see, we only see queues in one direction.
Yes, and we should accuse in others, but they were desperate for work and for money. The Arab countries are...
They should go to Saudi Arabia or Egypt or any other place. But just a moment, they say the Israelis are killing the Muslims, they are doing that, while, just let us be honest, Israel allows mosques to be built inside Israel, compared to Saudi Arabia that does not allow any church or allow you to even have a Bible or allow any book that contradicts the basic Islam. So it's extremely unfair. Okay, if the Israel deals with Arab in a bad manner, we would expect the 1 million and more Israeli Arabs to flee from Israel. Why this is not happening? It's just called in science indirect evidence. It's clear evidence that the Arabs who live under the Israeli control are in a good standard of living. They don't need to flee. They are not oppressed. Why the Palestinians who live under the Palestinian Authority, under their own Arab leaders, are the ones who are frustrated? So it's not Israel here. It is the leadership that itself.
I'm not sure if I would agree with you completely. I would certainly agree, though, that when it comes to religion, there is utter hypocrisy because, yes, Islam is followed in Israel, mosques are built, are respected, and yes, in most Muslim countries, if, for example, you try to build a synagogue,
forget about it.
And more. Back in a few moments. Where do we go from here, I suppose? Iraq is an open wound. And the Iraqi people have a perfect right to be angry. Number of people who are dying.
Yeah, sure.
Afghanistan doesn't seem to be working. I wish I could say the opposite, but it's very troubling. The Muslim world is boiling. I can understand some of the reasons why. How do we approach, as Westerners, how do we now approach Islam and the Muslim world? What do we say to them? What do we do?
Number one, the most important part here is to support a sort of peaceful understanding of Islam to dominate, because the cause of all these troubles that you mentioned, Iraq or Afghanistan, all were triggered by and initiated by the attack of September 11th, which were done by Islamists. So if there is someone to be blamed, it is the Islamists. And actually the weak response that happened after they attacked Tanzania and Kenya, the embassies of USA there, the weak response back then encouraged the terrorists to attack you again, or attack the free world again. So the whole problem was triggered by this form of teaching and by Islamism and by terrorism. So it's unfair to put all the blame on the West, because I noticed something in the West, that many people have extraordinary ability to do self-criticism, but the moment they come to criticize others, they become mentally paralyzed. They have no problem to say the Catholic Church was wrong in the Dark Ages. They have no problem to say Bush administration is wrong. They have no problem at all to criticize themselves. But when they come to criticize others, they, as I mentioned, they become mentally paralyzed. So what if the problem is in the others? What will happen then? If you all, it will be like a mechanic who assumed that the problem is in the engine, while the problem is in the battery. He can spend all his life fixing the engine and it will not work. And that is the main cause of the problem. Because if you want to solve this problem, you have to address the causes in unbiased manner. If the problem is in the Islamic teaching, then it is in the Islamic teaching. Otherwise, you will be a liar if you didn't say this. So the truth here is that there are many factors here in this whole equation, okay? But trying to deny the factors that even the terrorists themselves said to you clearly. Al-Zawahiri just said recently on the CNN that if you all converted to Islam or subjugated to Islamic Sharia or Taliban-like system, in other words, just to make it clear for you what does he mean, they will stop terrorism. So all these causes, imaginary causes, that Iraqi war and Arab-Palestinian conflict and the frustration in the middle, who should be frustrated? They are killing innocents everywhere. They are killing their Iraqi Christians and the Iraqi Shias. They are killing people in Algeria, innocent tourists in Egypt. Who should be frustrated, you or them? I just can't understand it.
You're frustrated, obviously.
Frustrated of of the lack of wisdom in approaching this problem. Because you need some element of wisdom to think in an honest manner. All what is needed here is honesty. If I am wrong, I will say I am wrong. If the others are wrong, I will say the others are wrong. Just scientific analysis.